have several executive producers on the series. I was also the showrunner. So the way that this new project came about is one of the other EPs on the project, Tracy Ullman, had a partner in Chicago, a journalist named Allison True, and they had been looking into some of the lingering questions around the Gacy case since about 2011. And they came to NBC News Studios, and we partnered with them, and we decided and Peacock acquired this documentary from us. And so it's been a great partnership. And here we are. We've got a 6-part series. And I think we've explored a lot of unique questions in the series.
Mm-hmm. And I understand one of the highlights is the fact that they're going to be airing some of a little bit about Gacy from prison.
Yes, so in the series, we were lucky to be able to acquire a 3.5-hour interview done in prison with John Gacy himself. And the way that interview came about is a man named Craig Bowley began writing to Gacy in the 1980s, and they became pen pals and then friends, and they would speak on the phone multiple times per week. And eventually, Gacy was on death row, and Craig was able to arrange this interview. Robert Ressler, former FBI profiler, was the one who conducted the interview. And the interview itself ranges across many different topics, and we've woven it throughout the series. So viewers are really going to get a glimpse of Gacy himself. And it's pretty fascinating because Gacy, by all appearances, seems like a fairly normal guy. He's not someone you would necessarily see and say, oh, that's a serial killer. And that was one of the most dangerous things about him. He was functioning as a guy next door, a successful businessman, successful family man. He was married twice and had kids. He was involved in Chicago politics. And yet here he was committing these horrific crimes by night. And it's definitely chilling to watch him speak in this interview.
How did you feel to watch?
Well, what's interesting is the first time that I watched the interview, I really didn't know what to think. He alternates between truth and lies so seamlessly that even as someone who knows the details of the case, you're not always sure when he might be telling you something that there could be more to that story. Should you pursue that lead? Or if he's just messing with you or messing with Robert Ressler. And I think it's one of the most fascinating parts of the story of John Wayne Gacy is who was he really? What was the truth and what was fiction?
What year was this interview done?
The interview was done in 1992 and Gacy was executed in 1994. So it was not long before he was put to death.
Does he talk about how he felt about being under, potentially death row, or was that already?
Gacy's feelings about being on death row are something we touch on in the series. He seemed not to be that perturbed by it. He was always focused on getting out of it. And he seemed to believe, at least according to folks in the series, that he was going to be successful in getting out of it because he'd been so successful in getting out of so many things in the past. Whether that was a ruse and he was just putting on airs, or he actually believed that, it's hard to know. Ultimately, he was wrong. He was put to death.
Right. And I understand another one of the highlights you have, if I'm not mistaken, you have the second ex-wife.
We have an audio recording with the second ex-wife of Gacy, and she really, you have to really feel for her because she was living with this man who obviously was behaving strangely, but she was not, of course, piecing together what he was doing. She had no real clue of what was going on. And so, they were divorced by the time his crimes were discovered. And I can only imagine what she went through when she reads in the newspapers that this is going on. He had a lot of people in his life like that. He had close friends, he had his family members, he had his first wife and his second wife. He was able to have these relationships with people, which is what helped him seem so normal. And these people didn't know what was going on behind closed doors.
And she's actually one of the people that lived in that house besides the mom, right? Her and her children, not Gacy's kids.
Correct. Her children, yeah. So yes, she lived in the house for a time with Gacy where the bodies were subsequently found. And not to give away too many spoilers, but she actually smelled smells in the house and would speak to John about them, she thought there were dead animals underneath the house, and he would just blow her off and say, no, you're crazy. There's no smells. Don't worry about it. And turned out she was right. There were things that were rotting under the house, but she had no idea, of course, what they actually were.
Mhm. So while I was doing my research, I saw an interview that Karen, John Wayne's sister, had an interview with Oprah Winfrey, where she talks about having a last conversation with her brother, and he says that he was not really guilty of all the deaths. What do you think, or does the documentary cover this?
Yes, the documentary definitely goes into the question of whether Gacy was in fact responsible for all the victims that he was convicted of murdering. Certainly, Gacy claims in his interview, his prison interview, that there may have been other people involved, that he didn't act alone, that he couldn't possibly have killed all of these people. But the problem is he also then turns around and says something that contradicts that. So it's really hard to know how much of what he's saying is the truth. And of course, Gacy's sister would want to believe the best about her brother. And the fact is, we just don't have any evidence to know one way or the other for sure.
And Karen's part of this documentary?
Karen is part of the documentary. She appears in it.
Okay. And any other people that that are first time seeing talking
Yes,
about?
we have some exclusive interviews in the series. Craig Bowley is one of them. He's the man who arranged the prison interview. There's also the surviving partner of one of Gacy's assault victims. So Gacy didn't just have murder victims. He also had a couple of young men who were brutally beaten and maybe left for dead, but they survived Gacy's assaults. And one of them, his partner, appears in the series. Unfortunately, the victim himself died in 2000, but what he went through and what the partner went through are just horrific and tragic. And that man has never spoken before.
Mm-hmm. Is there someone you guys reached out to and just declined, wanted nothing to be a part of it?
Sure, there were people who didn't want to be a part of the series, and I understand that. For some people, they've talked about it before, and it's just very painful to relive the memories. And that happens with every documentary. You don't always get access to the folks that you'd love to speak to. You can still have very positive relationships with them or dynamics and conversations, but they just choose not to participate in the series.
Well, putting all this together, did you guys by any chance try to reach out, if they are even able to track them, are his two kids? Because I believe he has a daughter and a son, right?
You know, I can't really comment on that. There may have been outreach made. I'm not sure.
Okay. How do you feel in reference to his outcome? Do you think he deserved the death penalty?
Gacy was executed in 1994, and it was a huge spectacle, and there were people outside of the prison facility where he was executed. And it's funny, the road was divided. Some people were celebrating his killing, and some people were protesting the death penalty. I think it really depends on where your personal beliefs about the death penalty lie. Certainly people involved with the case, including the prosecutors who tried the case, felt that he got what he deserved.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that it would have been a different outcome had it been more on the recent days?
Well, I happen to know that the state of Illinois no longer has the death penalty. So if he had been convicted in later years, he would not have been put to death.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And anything else that you can share about the documentary and reliving the case?
I think that for many people who have been involved with this case for over 40 years now, what's really telling about the way that it's impacted their lives is how they speak about the stories to this day as if it's still somewhat fresh. This was a huge and horrific and really unprecedented case for many people, from the investigators to the attorneys to the journalists who were covering the stories. It was a really profound and difficult story to cover. It also, changed the lives of those folks. It changed their careers. And of course, the surviving family members of the victims they're still dealing with some of this today. And the fact that there are still unanswered questions around the case is something that they grapple with as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time and talking about this documentary. I myself wasn't born yet when all this happened, so it got me like, wow, like it's unbelievable how someone can get away with so much. So it kind of opens your eyes to, you never know who's out there.
That's right. And I think, I also wasn't born when he was arrested, but I think he hopefully today it's a lot harder to get away with that kind of thing with the technology that we have and the sort of greater social awareness that we have. You would hope that someone like him could not operate with such ease, but you also never know. I mean, he was extremely convincing and extremely charming.
That's right. There are many others, I'm not going to mention them, but yeah, that had like very similar characteristics that it makes it unbelievable.
Yeah, it can be very upsetting if you think about it, but it's also, I think, why it's important to, know the history around these cases.
Very true, very true. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will be watching it with others. I didn't get a chance to check it out. So on this Thursday, the 25th on Peacock.
Well, I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Meet you.